It's time for Talking Michigan Transportation, a podcast devoted to the conversations with people at the forefront of the ongoing mobility revolution. In the state that put the world on wheels, here's your host, MDOT Communications Director, Jeff Cranston.
Hi, welcome again to the podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about climate change and what it means to roads and bridges, not just trying to sustain them, but planning ahead for building in what we know is going to be a more volatile period, and what it means in terms of high water and the toll that that takes on roads and bridges. Because this week, Governor Whitmer is putting a special spotlight on the environment in Michigan and what climate change means and prevention of pollution and really everything that relates to protecting our precious Great Lakes environment. So I'm going to start out with Hugh McDiarmid, who is my counterpart at the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, also known as EGLE. And he's going to give us kind of a high-level view of what's going on with the action team comprised of several agencies that are working on high water issues and Great Lakes levels and the impact that they're having on the environment. And then I'm going to talk with Matt Chenoweth, who is the Chief Bridge Engineer and the Administrator of the Bureau of Bridges and Structures at MDOT, and he's going to explain what all this means in terms of trying to maintain our bridges. So we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
So going back to the summit in February that you guys convened with several state agencies, but you were obviously in the lead. We know that water levels are some of the highest in more than 2 decades, and that there's really no reason to think that they're going to subside soon. It's taken a toll on certainly transportation infrastructure and state parks and inland waterways, as well as the Great Lakes. And just from a global perspective, money is tight, obviously, for everybody. So what do you think you guys can do, given the resources and what needs to be done?
Sure, Jeff. Let me say at the outset, there's a limit to what we can do because Mother Nature is pretty much in control of this situation. But we have a certain number of levers that we can pull to help communities, to help homeowners, to help the folks who manage our infrastructure cope with some of these high water levels. And that was sort of the focus of the summit earlier this year. So some things we can do. We do a lot of education. We provide technical support and outreach to communities and in helping them know what's coming, how to best deal with some of the threats that the high water has on their communities and on property and potential land lives in shoreline areas. And we've also put a lot of effort into expediting our permit process. We give permits out for shoreline work to ensure that it is, first of all, going to work, and second of all, not going to harm neighbors, because sometimes some of the barriers and things that people put in on an ad hoc basis can actually have negative rather than positive consequences.
Could you cite a specific for that? I mean, not name names, but talk about that kind of thing that somebody, a lakefront property owner might do.
Sure. I mean, it's certainly for a shoreline property owner who is worried about his home being washed away, his vacation home being washed away, or her vacation home being washed away. It's certainly tempting to pile rocks or wood or hay bales, sometimes sandbags in front of those waves to stop them. And, on the surface that makes sense, but depending on the wave action, the currents, and the places that you are in the lake, that can actually have more of a negative effect than a positive. It can actually lead to more destruction, not only on your property, but to neighbors who are on either side of you. So we want to ensure that the things that people are putting in the lake to stop these waves or to slow down the action of the waves is not harming the lake, first of all, and not harming adjacent property owners, second of all.
Good. That makes a lot of sense. So, people talk about this in terms of it being cyclical, and that, we certainly know the Great Lakes have risen and declined over the years, but there seems to be something more going on now. So, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're at a period this where a lot of the Great Lakes were at record high water levels, and as you pointed out, that's a cyclical thing first and foremost. These water levels on the Great Lakes tend to rise and fall in roughly 30-35 year patterns, and we're at the peak right now. We had, I think, the more than 1 inch higher than the record levels for Michigan and Huron in the month of August, this past August. And, even absent any other factors, that would be a problem. It would be a problem for shoreline erosion. It would be a problem for roads washing out, as you've seen on Mackinac Island and various other places. And it would be a problem for homes that are built close to the shoreline or on a bluff that may be eroding. But on top of that cyclical problem that we have when water levels are at their highs, there is the effect of climate change, which is maybe not the key driving force in the water levels, but it certainly contributes to it. And by that, I mean the water levels are already high. We're seeing more frequent and more intense storms, which tend to chip away at the bluffs and at the shorelines. We're seeing increases in precipitation throughout the Great Lakes Basin. We have recently experienced the highest precipitation in 1, 3, and 5 year periods in recorded history in Michigan, and that is increasing lake levels. And we're also seeing generally a decline in ice cover each winter. And the ice cover that covers the lakes helps to keep keep the water from evaporating. And when there isn't ice on the lakes, you get more water evaporating, which leads to that cyclical cycle. So there are a lot of factors at play. And while climate change isn't the driving factor, it certainly isn't multiplying the effect of the high water issues.
Anything else you want to talk about that that people might not think of in terms of the harm to the environment? Algae blooms, other problems with fish and plant species. Just how disruptive this can be, I guess.
Yeah, I can ramble on for a little bit, and as the governor's taken some bold action this week with the climate change executive order and executive directive, which puts Michigan on a path of carbon neutrality by 2050, which means that we will not be a net contributor of carbon, which is the key heat-trapping greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. So that's very exciting, and of course, changing the amount of carbon and greenhouse gases we put in the atmosphere is going to take a long time to see effects. The effects that we're going to see in the next couple decades are already in motion. There's not a lot that we can do about it. So we have to practice adaptation. We have to educate folks and communities to change the way they do infrastructure, to change the way your roads at MDOT are built, to change the way people think about living on the shoreline. Maybe your home should be back farther than you would like it, and that beautiful view of the lake might be a little farther back to protect your home. And communities can do things like preparing infrastructure, ensuring that that if they're in an area that's prone to flooding, that they take measures to ensure that their electrical equipment and other sensitive machines are up above the flood level grade, things like that. So there are ways that we can prepare for it. The governor's put us on a path to reduce our emissions and eventually be a net zero carbon emitter. But in the short term, we're going to have to prepare for some effects, and we're seeing some of those right now.
That's good. That's a good summary, Hugh, and sets us up well since you mentioned roads for our next guest. So thanks. I appreciate it. As promised, part 2 today, we're going to be speaking with Matt Chenoweth, who is the chief bridge engineer at MDOT and is the administrator of the Bureau of Bridges and Structures. He has vast experience with all kinds of bridges, but mainly today I want to talk about high water and what the ongoing impact is going to be on our bridge structures and their supports, especially as we know when water rises, currents tend to increase, and rapid currents put more pressure on supports. So thanks, Matt, for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
So, I talked earlier with Hugh McDiarmid at Eagle about the high water action team and that the governor convened. They had a summit back in February. Several state agencies, including MDOT, were involved in that and talking about the volatile climate and what it means in terms of protecting waterfront properties and everything from boating and water sports to maintaining roads and bridges. So in your role as not just a bridge engineer, but really a very intellectually curious person who studies all kinds of things related to infrastructure, what do you think about the rising waters and faster currents? And can you talk about what you've noticed in recent years?
Yeah, I think the data shows us that while the overall total amount of rainfall in any given year isn't going up or down. The intensity of these storms, so they is much higher than it used to be. So a storm will come in and it'll drop vast amounts of water in a short period of time. And what that means is you've got all these various drainage areas, right? Boundaries. And as the water drains from that, that all eventually gets into the rivers and stream systems that run through the state and then out into the Great Lakes. And so, what we see is when we have these huge rainfall events, water levels rise. We have a population of bridges that we monitor in these events. We have bridges that are considered either scour critical or scour susceptible that we actually have action plans for that. And this is not just MDOT, these are all the local bridges too. So, all 13,000 bridges in the state, for the ones that are over waterway and the ones that are scour susceptible and scour critical, inspectors know to check if there's a USGS gauge station out there that's measuring water levels and flows. We check those, and then we have to do site visits, and we check the footings for stability. There's a whole, behind-the-scenes resource allocation amongst bridge inspectors that happens when we have these high water events.
So explain the concept of scour, because I think to a lot of people that sounds like something you do when you clean your sink. So.
Oh, well, yeah, actually, it's a very similar action. So what scour is, there's a couple of different types of scour that we designed for, but basically what scour is as the water flows underneath or through a bridge opening, a lot of times you'll notice that the bridge has abutments that will actually narrow the cross-section of the river right at the bridge, or there are piers that are actually in the water that create an obstruction. And what ends up happening is as the water swirls around that, number one, the velocity increases, so the water accelerates as it's going through the bridge opening. And that obstruction causes all these different actions. There's different types of water oscillations and vortex shedding and all of this. But what it does is it picks up the material, so the riverbed that is supporting the footing, and it erodes it away. And what makes scour so dangerous to a bridge is that if enough of the footing is scoured away, if enough of that footing support material is scoured away, you could have a progressive collapse of the bridge. And it's a very difficult thing to inspect for. It's a difficult phenomenon to inspect for, because by a visual inspection, as the current slows down, it deposits sandy, silty materials into the hole that was formed by the higher velocity water. And so by just looking at it, you can't tell. So you got to get in there and you've got to probe. We use sonar to bounce, beams back and forth to find scour holes. And so that's why when these events happen, you have to have all hands on deck, hands-on approach to go out there and do inspections, probe the footings, and take the necessary actions.
So these are all things that are going on kind of out of sight. And, we know when water's over a road and, like what's going on up in Alberta and Benzie County right now, that a lane has been closed all summer because of high water. So you can see that, you're inconvenienced. What you're talking about are things that are going on literally below the surface and that could have a tremendous dramatic effect on a structure.
Correct. Yeah, and the motoring public may never know all that's happening, all that we're doing after a high water event to make sure things are safe. But what they do notice is when something gets closed, it's an inconvenience, but it's closed because we are unsure of the stability until the water levels kind of recede and we can verify that everything's safe. When we had the dam breach up in Edenville and Midland there, the day after, actually that night and then the day after, MDOT closed 23 bridges. We had 23 bridges closed by 5 p.m. the next day. One bridge had completely collapsed. One bridge, the approach washed out, and then there were a couple of local bridges that had also washed out or were completely underwater. But there were a whole other population of bridges that just driving by, you wouldn't think anything of it. Yeah, the water's flowing under it. It's flowing very fast, but they remain closed until we could do a proper scour assessment.
Yeah, we had an event up there last week, as you know, just to reopen one of those bridges on M30 in Edenville. And while that only helped out a handful of homeowners because there's another bridge further north that still needs to be reopened, it was pretty incredible, I guess, festive event for the families that were happy to have that connection back. So our crews worked very quickly to do that, which is great.
Yeah, we were fortunate on that one, Jeff, because the one that was reopened last week, it survived an event that it was not designed for. That much flow coming down and that amount of time at that speed, you can't design for something like that. But it speaks to the robustness of the design. Yes, the approach is washed out, but the bridge itself, the structure, was intact. So we reconstructed the approaches and reopened the bridge.
So, talk about the median age of bridges in the state and, how MDOT monitors those bridges and structures during these more frequent and higher intensity flooding events.
Yeah, so, we have bridges in the state that are still, bridges and culverts that have been in service for 100 years, and we have bridges and culverts that have been in service for a year. So we have a whole vast array of bridge ages and conditions. Most of the bridges in the state on the freeway system were built from the late 50s into the mid 70s. But we have this population, this network of this network of bridges that all come from different eras of design. We have many bridges that were designed and built before there was, scour, to design against scour and scour countermeasures and stuff like that. And we race against time to retrofit those as best we can. But the monitoring that we do is very significant. As I mentioned earlier, each one of these bridges that would be considered scour susceptible or scour critical has a very specific scour monitoring plan or plan of action when water levels reach a certain height, and these plans are very in depth, even going into detail in terms of who the emergency management contact is if we have to close the bridge, what resources to use. So that's how we manage our network. We design bridges now, over waterways to resist scour. So we put the foundation. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, since you talk about design and, the transportation planners and engineers, they talk about building for resiliency. Talk about what that means and how it sounds good, in theory, but, we all know that Michigan, like a lot of states, is in a chronic transportation funding crisis, and you can't do everything that you'd like to do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So these days, we design bridges to resist the 200-year flood events and to be stable in the 500-year flood events. And what that means is the foundations have to go very deep. The foundations are very robust. But what it also means is, so there's a cost right there, because drilled shaft foundations are very deep, pile-driven foundations. That's an expensive venture. But what we also find we're doing is we're lengthening the bridges to get the abutments and the approaches as far away from, the high water, the anticipated or the calculated high water as possible. So we're actually finding that an average bridge that's over a waterway right now, when MDOT goes in to replace it, we are actually increasing the length on average by about 30%. And so you take into account the fact that, the average cost of a bridge is anywhere from, $200 to $250 to $300 a square foot. When you're adding 30% to the length of the bridge to get the abutments out of the floodplain or out of the 200-year high water elevation, again, it means it's a more expensive bridge than what was originally there and what would have been allowed, 30 years ago.
So once again, the Great Lakes and the water are part of what make Michigan a beautiful state and a great place to live, but it also presents tremendous challenges from a transportation standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just Michigan. If you remember years ago, Hurricane Sandy there that hit the New Jersey, New York coastline, there were areas of Atlantic City, I think, and areas of Manhattan that for the first time ever were underwater, right? These pieces of infrastructure were not built for anything like that. I believe the Holland Tunnel was flooded. These are things that just don't normally happen, that over the past, 10 years or so, we've seen these events that cause that high water, cause that flooding. No matter, what we want to argue about, the fact is that things are more volatile, and as you said, the events are much more extreme and much more dangerous. So yes,
that can't be denied. So Matt, thanks for taking time to explain this, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about all of these things probably the next time we have a major flooding event and your crews are forced into emergency action on more bridges.
Great. Always good to talk to you, Jeff.
Okay, thanks again for listening to this week's edition of Talking Michigan Transportation, and I want to give a special thanks to Corey Peedy, who does the sound engineering for the podcast, and to Sarah Martin of MDOT, who does the show's intro and closing.
That's a wrap for this edition of Talking Michigan Transportation. Check out show notes and more on SoundCloud or by subscribing on Apple Podcasts.